So here's a film I'd never heard of until I got it on disc, which is something I probably say pretty often because a lot of times these films are new to me, which is great because I love going into a film. It's rare because most people kind of want to know what they're going to see or what the film is about that they're paying to see, but I get these discs gratis, as they say, so I'm just like, let it wash over me. This is Lover's Lane from 1999. Arrow has just released this on Blu-ray. It's a film I'd never heard of. Now, this is another one of those where maybe if I looked this up, I would recognize the video cover for being in the video store, but it's just, it was new to me. And this, from 1999, it's directed by Jon Steven Ward, and it stars, Anna Farris is probably the biggest name now who's involved in this movie, but it also stars Richard Sanders. Les Nessman from WKRP in Cincinnati. I'm a huge WKRP fan, and you didn't see Richard Sanders in a ton of high-profile stuff after KRP. So for a lot of people, he was just like only ever Les Nessman. So for me to see him in a film that came out, gosh, better than a decade after KRP went off the air, less than a decade after the new KRP, was kind of cool. I'm like, oh, what's he going to be in this? So Richard Sanders plays a Dr. Loomis-esque figure. So the film opens up with a cop and his daughter are driving home from at night from somewhere, and they see this big fracas on the side of the road, and they pull over. There's ambulances, there's flashing lights, and some hooked killer has murdered several people on Lover's Lane who were in cars, and turns out that one of those people was his wife. So he's grief-stricken. The little girl is traumatized in a very subtle way because she doesn't really visibly react to it, but she sees her dead mother there on the ground. Flash forward 13 years, that little girl is now in high school, and she's got a bunch of friends in high school, which, you know, you'd hope most people do. And suddenly well, not suddenly. We go to the insane asylum where the person that they believe to be the hooked killer has been captive and studied by the Richard Sanders character, the Dr. Loomis, if you will. And at some point, he enacts bloody escape and is on the loose again. And now it is a matter of finding this killer before he kills again. And is he coming after the surviving, the little girl? What's going on? Who will survive and what will be left of them? Ultimately, it becomes a slasher movie. Ultimately becomes a hooked killer stalking this girl's friends, and who's left. So I thought this was really not very good. Competently made, but let's take it just to jump to the left. Let's talk, okay. And ultimately, these reviews are just what I think about something, but I also want to tell you what you get with this. So you may love this movie and say, this guy's full of it, but then I'll tell you what's on the Blu-ray, okay? So I'm not a fan of the 90s. I lived through the 90s. I was an upper youth in the 90s. I was, let's say, grown up in the 90s. But the 90s aesthetic, the 90s visual aesthetic I really don't like. It makes me queasy. Like the haircuts and the clothes and a lot of the music and what things look like and graphics and visual style. So just know that when I talk about a lot of 90s movies, I'm going to like them less than somebody who is enamored with the era or who is maybe a little kid in the era and has nostalgia for it. So the film is presented in 4:3, original 4:3 or special widescreen. I chose to watch it in widescreen. I usually want to watch stuff in its original form, but I said, let me try the widescreen, and it looked perfect to me. So I sort of think this movie might have been intended, or they probably knew it was going straight to video, so they shot it with 4:3 in mind so that, you know, nothing would be compromised. A lot of times they'll do that, and like if you see Seinfeld on TV, on your widescreen TV now, they just basically crop the lower part of the frame off. They readjust if they have to, but usually you're just missing legs and stuff. Or sometimes if they shoot 4:3 knowing it might go theatrical, they'll leave a little bit more headroom. So anyway, the compositions in this looked fine. Great transfer. I didn't think it was shot all that well. It has that overlit 90s look where everything is like super bright all the time, and which I don't mind for night scenes. We kind of swung the other way at some point where night scenes became unwatchable and impenetrable. Like forever it was just like, yeah, throw a blue filter on it, make it dark in general. People will know it's nighttime. They don't have to not see. But this did fine in the night scenes. It just, I didn't care for the look of it. It wasn't very interestingly shot. It wasn't very interestingly like composed or blocked as far as a lot of the sequences go, and I thought most of the acting was pretty bad. Anna Farris is fine. I'm not a big Anna Farris fan, but if you are, this is maybe her first role. Everybody else in it was Richard Sanders is fine. The adult actor playing the cop is okay. but it was just really bland to me. You know, it's trying to sort of evoke the old Lover's Lane, tapping, scratching on the. It's an old urban legend about people in Lover's Lane, and they hear tapping on the door, and they hear about an escaped maniac, and they leave, and they find a hook hanging from the door and all that. This basically turns that into a movie, and it was just too generic and not interesting and kind of dull. I thought all the guys. Can I say douche? Sure. All the guys were like mega douchey, and part of that is that '90s look. The haircuts and the way they the clothes and the I'm just like, oh. And at some point it changed with horror and slasher movies where you used to kind of root for the victims or the potential victims to survive. And at some point it flopped, and it was everybody is super annoying and you're rooting for them all to be killed. And I go either way with that, but in general, I don't want to watch a movie and spend time with people I hate, and this was one of those movies where I just thought everybody was pretty douchey. Maybe the girl who was the grown-up daughter of the murder victim in the beginning, she was probably the most likable character, but all her friends, I was just like, where's the hook? So I didn't care for the movie. So what do we got here? The extras, you have a commentary with the writers and producers of the film. You've got an extra that is about 30-ish minutes that is a making of or a retrospective. So you get those producer writers again and a couple of the cast members talking about making the film. And then you have the trailer, and you have an image gallery that has like it has 109 images in that. And a lot of them are just, it's an interesting thing with image galleries, I find. A lot of times they'll have a lot of images that are taken like in a sequence, in a moment, that are really, really similar. And sometimes you'll just get those in a row, so you'll see somebody be like, hey, oh, ah. And then sometimes it'll be like, and it's this, and then it's a few other things, and then it's this. And it always feels weird, like you're going back to them. This is laid out that way, which is a little strange. A lot of them were like a little out of focus and not very interesting, but I then step out of myself and I say, if you really like Lover's Lane from 1999, you want every image you can. There's a movie that I'm a mega fan of that if you know me, you know, and any semi-in-focus shot taken around the circumstances of that production I want to see. So, you know, kudos to Arrow for giving the fans of Lover's Lane I don't want to be mean, because I mean, people who worked on this movie. Is a tiny movie that is getting the Arrow treatment, and I always have respect for that. And I'm sure there are people who love this or who are going to really like this. But for me, this is one of those titles where I'm like, why did Arrow put this out? Like, Arrow puts out great stuff and digs up some really great lost treasures. And then sometimes they put out something like this or .com for murder, and I'm like, did this really warrant the Arrow treatment? At any rate, if you're a fan of films and horror films from circa 1999 and the look and the feel of all that, if you're a fan of Anna Farris, if you're a fan of Richard Sanders and want to see him in a horror movie and doing things that Les Nessman would never do, then, you know, maybe check this out. So on Blu-ray from Arrow Video from 1999, Lover's Lane.